Anti-monarchy protesters in the UK are facing arrest simply for criticizing the royal family. According to NPR reporting, a new law passed just last month allows police to act against protesters that, quote, may have a significant impact on others or are, quote, unjustifiably noisy. One 22-year-old was arrested and charged with breaching the peace in Scotland for holding this sign, which says, F Imperialism, abolish the monarchy. And another man was violently pulled away from Queen Elizabeth's casket procession by British police after reportedly heckling Prince Andrew. Let's watch.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
Of course, Prince Andrew, who has come under scrutiny for his associations with Jeffrey Epstein. So, what do you make of all of this? There's been a lot of, not just here in the UK, but obviously online, where the focus of a lot of speech discourse often has been on the Nigerian professor who said that she basically did not care that the queen had died and frankly wished her, to have a painful death, something that I might not have said, but which people are putting in the context of Queen Elizabeth having overseen the colonial oppression of her country of Nigeria, an instigator of the civil war there that resulted in the deaths of many of her own family members. And it does seem to be there's a little bit of a difference between how the victims of other kinds of violence are treated as they discuss the perpetrators, the people who oversaw the inequities that were done to them, and how people are being treated in the context of the royal family.
Sure. Because I think I want to discuss the kind of censorship protesting issue. I don't want to get bogged down in the colonialism debate. Is it a debate? It's not a debate. But Queen Elizabeth is not responsible for she's a figurehead, right? Is she a figurehead
who could have spoken out against what was being done in the name of the crown?
Okay, but it's not fair to attribute to her these are government policies that she is not responsible for.
Is it fair to attribute to Joe Biden the fact that inflation is high, or that we're at war with?
He is responsible for government policy. Queen Elizabeth is not.
I'm sorry. So
she's not the prime minister. She's not the parliament.
A crown, which frankly had a lot more control earlier in her reign and had a much less symbolic role than it does now. The Queen Elizabeth is largely seen as overseeing the transition from a more active crown to a more passive figurehead crown. But when she came into power, it was at the end of a lot of the colonial regimes in a lot of these countries. Nigeria, for instance, became independent in 1960.
Right, they were pivoting away from colonialism. They were disbanding the colonial empire.
So it was truly a colony at the point in which Queen Elizabeth became the Queen of England.
Right.
And you're saying that a country that has been under the colonial heel, we talk a lot about imperialism and why it's bad on this show. So a country that was under the heel of an imperial state like England a citizen of that country or former citizen of that country doesn't have the right to express dissatisfaction with the fate of that regime?
They absolutely have the right, and I agree that these protesters in the street here, so they don't necessarily have the right because they don't live in the United States. They live in the United Kingdom where there's no First Amendment.
Well, the professor's tweet was taken down off Twitter.
I'm talking about the protesters.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying that even in America, there's some people who are not having the right to speak freely as well, just like the ones in England. But I'm sorry, we can go back to the UK examples.
This shows you why the First Amendment, which we do have, is so important. It protects utterly your right to say things that other people find insensitive or insulting in the public space, in the street. And it's a good thing because people absolutely should have the right to scrutinize and to criticize harshly and sensitively, even if I disagree with it, their government, their monarch, their leaders, their powerful people. And we have that, and other countries don't, including the UK, where you can be arrested, jailed, etc., for insensitive public speech. And people are all the time for hate speech, which lacks any kind of actual definition and is just a catch-all term that the authorities can use to arrest, imprison, fine, hassle you, harass you for engaging in speech. These people were engaging in speech, and with the Epstein connections to Prince Andrew, that's a very legitimate area of topic. It's one we've explored on the show numerous times. So we're not going to disagree substantively on what should happen to these people. They absolutely have the right to disagree. But I see you giving me the.
No,
you want to go back to the she was not. I don't hold Elizabeth II responsible for.
What's very interesting is that so much of what
Africa.
folks. Which is an interesting choice. But what's so interesting is that so much of what folks focused about on that professor's tweet is the idea that it was distasteful. And I think that that's perfectly fair. Again, I wouldn't choose to express myself in exactly that way. Of course,
May
my
her pain
own ancestors,
be excruciating.
My own ancestors, were subjugated differently, and frankly might have been freed earlier if the United States hadn't broken away from England, which did end slavery before the United States of America. So I have my own colonial journey that I'm on, so I don't share her same very personal relationship to what England as a colonial power has done. However, I certainly, no matter what a nice and charming person they might have been, would happily use a similar level of vitriol if I ever knew the names or went back in time and came in contact with someone who had enslaved one of my ancestors. And I have very harsh words for people who have caused immediate harm to me and my family as a person who is alive today. So I certainly wouldn't begrudge anybody that. But what I'm curious about is that so much of it seemed to be about whether or not it was distasteful. And certainly hollering at a funeral procession is similarly, I think, perceived as distasteful to other people. So I wonder whether or not you think it is appropriate in the same way that people thought it was inappropriate for this professor to tweet, for someone to start shouting about the accusations against Prince Andrew in the context of the Queen's processional. Do
I think it was inappropriate? No, not really. It's a public person in a public place, and they have that right. I mean, they have the right to do it. It's so beside the point whether I find it distasteful or not. I mean, I would not choose to interrupt, funeral processions. But even like in America, even the Westboro Baptist Church, the most vile, disgustingly hateful group of people you can possibly imagine, have had their rights litigated at the highest court in the land, and they get to shout "good riddance, we're glad you died" and expletives at our service people. I just think that that's interesting, because at the end of the day, so much of what But I do think that speech is insensitive.
But if you don't want to litigate the substance of whether or not the professor was right or wrong, or should be able on a speech analysis to say what she said, all that's really left is this conversation about how it was in bad taste. And there was a lot of words and a lot of heat devoted to how inappropriate it was for her to have said that. And that's why we got into the colonial debate, as you put it, because people were trying to push back and offer why, in fact, in the context of her own family's experience, it might be considered to be less appropriate.
I think it's distasteful
it is just interesting to me.
For excruciating pain on someone in almost all circumstances.
It's interesting to me to have so much more energy devoted to explaining why a colonial subject is distasteful for saying what she did, but no one thinks it's distasteful for someone to shout out and call out an alleged pedophile in the context of his mother's funeral brigade. I would argue that it says something about the value that we put on the underlying claims that both of those people are raising, that people think there's a lot more credibility and legitimacy to someone talking about Andrew, who is not the Queen, and his presence at that funeral and the accusations that have been made about him with Epstein, than they do to put in the credibility they put in the weight and value of a colonial subject whose family has been subject to a truly brutal civil war that a lot of people are ignorant of, and that it just really speaks to our cultural values.
I don't think it's. Well, maybe I'm holding a professor of sociolinguistics to a slightly higher standard than some random heckler on the street. Is she not, because she's?
She can't tweet. You don't have, when you just tweet about the Legends of Zelda or whatever. It's that in your professional capacity, and every single tweet you do is reflective of your professional life.
No, and I've certainly tweeted things I've regretted in the past, as I'm sure you have, but I would regret the things I tweeted in the past that were bad. You should regret. It's not a good thing to tweet a call for someone to suffer excruciating pain. That's something probably most people watching us, I think, would agree with.
And I think
even if that person is a flawed person and has been part of a family that was a flawed family and a bad a legacy. But
to be honest, I think just referring to them as flawed when you have overseen the mass murder and suffering of millions of people across the globe, caused famines intentionally that caused millions of people to suffer and die, real life human beings. I think minimizing it by characterizing it as flawed is exactly the problem here. And the fact of the matter is that I think that people are speaking out of a grand historical ignorance about exactly what the Crown did and the horrors that they subjected almost every corner of the world to. And actually, I think this is a wonderful learning moment, whatever you think about the tone of the professor's comment, to use this opportunity to learn something about colonial history, especially as we talk so much and importantly on this show about the risks of our own imperial endeavors right now, opening the door to that kind of world building exercise that used to be very common when the Crown really did rule the world. But we will, I'm sure, continue to have that particular conversation.
Tomorrow on Rising, Sabrina Salvati will be here to discuss AOC's cover on GQ. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, that should be fun. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you tomorrow.
I'm going to go watch that Legend of Zelda trailer. Bye, everybody.